Now, I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Robert Pollard. He's sitting right up here in front. I will give a bit of his background. He did work at the Deaf Wellness Center at the University of Rochester Medical Center for many years there. Dr. Pollard has been involved in a variety of research over the years, receiving federal, national, and local awards. He has a plethora of experience with research. He is a psychologist and specializes in behavioral sciences. Altogether, he has received over $6 million in grants thus far. Congratulations for that. He has also published more than 90 articles in his time, as well as book chapters, and produced 15 videos in ASL, American Sign Language. He's interested in researching psychopathology, psychological metrics, linguistics and interpreting, forensic evaluations, intimate partner violence is also something he's interested in. It's also known as domestic violence, and public health issues. He specializes in the deaf population more so than anything else. And he has been involved in many national organizations, including the APA, which is the American Psychological Association. That's a top psychological association and has multiple member benefits and et cetera. You can ask Dr. Pollard about that later if you'd like. And he has been involved in the APA and deaf wellness as part of that involvement there. So please welcome Dr. Pollard now.
So the common question I'm always asked is, when did I become interested in deaf people and learn sign language and that sort of thing? So I didn't learn sign until I went to graduate school, and I wasn't particularly interested in doing deaf-related things until graduate school, although I had a friend that was in my neighborhood when I was growing up here in Rochester who happened to be deaf. And of course, growing up in Rochester, anyone is certainly aware of the size of our local deaf population, so I'm sure that had some unconscious sort of influence on me, perhaps. So I grew up here in Rochester, and I'm happy to be back as a hometown boy. When it was time to go to college, I went to a college called Union College, which is near Albany in a town called Schenectady, New York. Small college, beautiful place.
I lived there. My dad went to the same college.
Oh, really? So your dad's an alum? What year did your dad graduate? Probably a long time ago like me. Yeah, okay. When I was in high school, I was really interested in biology and medical things, and I actually picked Union because I thought I wanted to go to medical school. And they had a really good reputation for the number of, the percentage of students that successfully got into medical school. But after a while, for a number of different reasons, and I'm smiling because some of them are a little, funny or embarrassing. So my first year in school, I got really enamored with working at the radio station and spent an enormous amount of time in the radio station and not doing my work. I also, for the first time, had a serious girlfriend, and that took a lot of time. So my first year in college, I didn't do particularly well, and my father was not happy with me, and I was not happy with myself. So my second year, I kind of dedicated more of my efforts to doing well in my studies. So I almost thought that I had to sort of give up the idea of going to medical school because I did so lousy in my first year in college. But by the end of 4 years in college, my grades were back up again, and I could have gone to medical school. But by that time, I was becoming much more interested in clinical psychology and decided I wanted to apply to a graduate school in clinical psychology. I actually got an award at college for the most improved psychology student. I was actually a double major in college in biology and psychology, and was taking courses in those two fields. And in the psychology field, I was beginning to do a number of different kinds of research projects, but especially projects related to the sort of the overlap or the intersection between biology and psychology, which I'll call psychophysiology. And that was my real strong area of interest during the later part of college. And I designed an experiment that I won't bore you with the details of it, but it was a psychophysiology experiment that I later found out was impressive to the people that I was applying to graduate school for. And as I will emphasize again later, for successful entry into graduate school, nothing is more important than getting research experience. It's really, really essential for, at least for scientific-related graduate school entrance. So any of you who are in college here and thinking about possibility of graduate education later on, I strongly encourage you to get involved in any way in research projects. So I applied to several different graduate schools. For me, as a psychologist, and I know wanted to become a psychologist, there was a wonderful resource from the American Psychological Association. It's a thick book that rates all of the APA-approved graduate programs and provides data about how many students they accept each year and financial aid and all sorts of things. And that book was really helpful to allow me to make a decision of where to apply for graduate school. And I forget how many graduate schools I applied to, probably 8 or so graduate schools. And I remember clearly the day that I got a letter from the University of Buffalo accepting me into their graduate program. And now understand, this was a long time ago. This would have been 1980, long before many of you were born. And at that time, the government had more financial resources that they were using to support students in science, et cetera. And so the University of Buffalo offered me a scholarship, free tuition plus like a paycheck every month, which was really great. But that was normal back at that time. It's not the same way now. And I did get into some other graduate school, but because I was a Rochester boy, I thought the idea of staying around Rochester would be great. My family was still here, et cetera. And I thought the program in Buffalo was attractive to me. Sometimes in psychology graduate schools, the school itself will have kind of a philosophy about the kind of psychology, especially the kind of clinical psychology orientation that they have, whether it's behavioral or cognitive behavioral or different kinds of clinical psychology orientations. But the University of Buffalo required that the students take a variety of different courses to get exposed to lots of different kinds of clinical psychology philosophies. So I liked that idea too. It's often true that in many graduate schools, the faculty will select students based on a match between the faculty's research interests and what the students' research interests happen to be. And so that was the situation there in Buffalo, where there was a person there, a faculty person there who was very well known in the psychophysiology world. And because that was my interest at the time, I'm sure that's why I was selected to go to the school and work in his lab, in his psychophysiology lab. So I started doing that, and I was involved in designing and carrying out a number of different psychophysiology experiments, in particular in a sort of subfield called biofeedback. Biofeedback is simply the idea that you use machines to inform you of bodily functions that you can't normally perceive, like EEG or blood pressure, et cetera, so the machine will allow you to see that, and then use like relaxation techniques or other kinds of techniques to try to control some of these physiological functions. So that's what I was doing. And in my first year of graduate school, I was invited to give a lecture, not a poster, but a lecture at a fancy psychophysiology conference, which was a big deal for a first-year graduate student to be invited to give a lecture instead of just a poster or something. So I did that, and I went to this conference, and my lecture was on the first day, and the conference itself was, I think, a four-day conference. And what happened after I gave my lecture, which was fun, and I enjoyed what I was talking about, of course, I went to the other lectures that were happening and networked and interacted with people. But by the end of the 4 days, or 3 days or 4 days, I actually felt like I'm not really interested in what these other people are doing. I'm only interested in what I was doing. I thought, ooh, that's a bad sign to not be interested in the broader field. So I like to say I had a kind of existential crisis when I left the conference thinking, well, maybe psychophysiology is not the right fit for me. So then I went home to Rochester. Well, I was visiting home, and it happened that my mother was on the board of directors of a local mental health agency. Maybe you've heard of this agency, DEPAUL, DePaul Mental Health Services. Well, I was working part-time for DePaul during graduate school. They had a lot of residential group homes for people with mental health problems, and I worked for them part-time while I was in graduate school. And anyway, one day during my existential crisis, my mother happened to tell me that at a board meeting that they made a decision that they wanted to open a group home for deaf adults with mental health problems. So this would have been about 1981, 1982. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Understand that psychophysiology is a very, very old field, very, very old field. Like the idea of perception, vision, hearing, taste, blah, 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 our senses, et cetera, is a very old area of research. And so one of the things when I heard about this deaf group home idea was that, first of all, the idea of deaf mental health, anything, seemed like so new. Like, who's doing that? And, well, the answer is nobody was really doing that. And the idea of perhaps being able to serve an underserved population, that was attractive. The idea of sign language felt attractive. So for many reasons, it really struck me as something I wanted to look into as potentially solving my existential crisis. So in Buffalo, I happened to start taking sign language courses at St. Mary's School for the Deaf, which at that time, which is part of the story, which is that time was extremely strict signed exact English. So I was learning all exact English signing, ing, tion, have, had, was, all of that kind of thing, which I still can do now. In addition to taking the sign courses, I started doing more of my schoolwork on what's up with deaf mental health. Looking into what is the literature of deaf mental health, who's doing any kind of research, et cetera, about that topic. And understand this is like the early 1980s, and the answer is, almost nothing. There were some people in the 1950s doing some work, et cetera, but at that time, it wasn't really well developed. I had to ask my, what we call our major professor, my psychophysiology professor. I remember feeling a little bit nervous going into his office and letting him know that I've decided to quit psychophysiology and start focusing on deaf-related psychology things. And he was very supportive, very, very supportive, and I appreciated that a lot. So while I continued my very strong interest in studying, et cetera, deaf-related things and learning sign, et cetera, hold on. So let me back up a little bit. So that group home, the DePaul Deaf Adult Group Home, opened around, oh, I don't know, maybe 1982 or around in there. And so they had, obviously had several job openings. And so I applied with my wonderful sign English skills. And the manager of the group home, who some of you know is an NTID alumnus, his name is Keith Cagle. Some of you may know him. So Keith was the manager of the group home at that time, and there were several other wonderful staff people, all like very capital D deaf people, ASL users, no voice, et cetera, and all of the patients, of course, were deaf as well. So it was a complete immersion environment. And during my discussions with Keith about working there, he was wondering, you're almost finished with your PhD. Why do you want to work in this like really low level, basic, requires a high school degree, or maybe not even requires a high school degree situation? And I said, because I want to learn more and be involved with deaf people, et cetera. And so it felt to both of us like a kind of win-win situation. I already knew a lot more about mental health than most of the people on that staff. And of course, they could help me with sign and deaf culture, et cetera. So it felt like a nice combination. And understand also, back in the mid-1980s, you couldn't read a book about deaf culture. There was no books like that. So everything I learned about the deaf experience and deaf culture, et cetera, was through direct interaction. And actually, Keith had never worked with a hearing person in his whole life. He's from an all-deaf family from many generations. So Keith had never worked to any significant degree with a hearing person. And of course, I had very limited experience with deaf people. So we were like opposite ends of the experience of what each other is like. And actually, it happened that he and I began to have some misunderstandings with each other. I'll say conflicts, but that's a strong word. They weren't as strong as conflicts, but misunderstandings and a little bit like annoying each other. But we trusted each other very, very well. And when we had a misunderstanding or sort of a culture conflict, we would always sit down afterwards and discuss what happened. Why did this bother you, or why did this bother me? And it was through that experience that I learned more about deaf culture, and he learned more about hearing people. And actually, we began doing lectures around the country on the topic of deaf-hearing relations and cultural conflict. We got halfway through writing a book, but that never got completed, so oh well. Anyway, so while I was, by that time I was still, really, really interested and committed now to, changing my career and working on, deaf-related things. But I didn't change my dissertation effort. And the reason why is because my dissertation happened to be on biofeedback, psychophysiology stuff. And like many colleges, students in the psychology major are sort of required to, or strongly encouraged to participate in a certain number of experiments. So you had this pool of college students that you could take advantage of for experiments. So I decided that was wise and easy to use the college students as my experimental subjects, rather than changing ideas and thinking about a deaf-related dissertation and where would I find deaf people and all that stuff, which would have really dragged out my dissertation work. So I decided that it would be more time expedient to just continue the dissertation in psychophysiology. And I think it was a really wise decision. So psychologists are required to do a one-year internship experience before they get their PhD. And usually a psychologist will look for APA-approved internship programs around the country and go to those programs. Well, at that time, again, there was no APA-approved internship program that would give me any exposure to deaf people, so I didn't want to do that. So I happened to hear that NTID had an internship program. Back then they did. Jane Bulduck was the person who ran that program. Some of you may remember her. Anyway, so I had a talk with Jane, and she was happy to offer me an opportunity to do an internship experience at the counseling center. Back at that time, NTID had its own counseling center. So they accepted me as an intern there. So when I went to the University of Buffalo and asked if it was all right if they didn't mind that I didn't do an APA-approved internship, they said that was okay with them if I also got inpatient experience. So, you know, of course, here at NTID, I couldn't get inpatient psychology treatment experience. So I worked out a plan with Rochester Psychiatric Center. So I worked here at NTID 3 days a week, and I worked at Rochester Psychiatric Center 2 days a week to get my inpatient experience. And that was all right, you know, with my University of Buffalo people. So that's how I completed my internship and was able to get my PhD in that unusual way. And of course, during that year here at NTID, I continued to take real ASL courses instead of signed English courses. And so that plus, you know, the continued interaction with the deaf group home where I stayed and worked through my internship year as well really helped me, you know, improve my signing skills and knowledge of deaf community, deaf culture, et cetera. So, you know, this was before social media, and so looking for a job was a different kind of experience than it probably is for, you know, you all today. So there happened to be a directory of mental health services for deaf people in America. There wasn't many. I think maybe the directory had 25 or so addresses or programs. So I wrote a letter to all of them looking for work. And it happened that a program in Columbus, Ohio, offered me a job. It was a place called the Community Center for the Deaf in Columbus. And Columbus, well, in that program, well, let me back up a little bit. So Ohio at that time had altogether 10 CCDs, Community Centers for the Deaf. And each CCD was like, you know, interpreter referral and just a variety of different kinds of services, you know, tax help for deaf people, et cetera. And almost all of the CCDs in Ohio were affiliated with a hearing and speech center. But the one in Columbus was affiliated with a mental health program. So it was a perfect fit for me because I needed supervision. Psychologists are required to have like lots and lots of hours of supervision under a licensed psychologist until we are able to take a licensing exam, et cetera. So the fact that the Columbus CCD was affiliated with a mental health program was perfect. There was a psychologist there who supervised me, even though he didn't know anything about deaf stuff. It was a hearing mental health agency. But it worked out well for me. So my job was to be the psychologist for the CCD, and as I said before, the other staff of CCD were like interpreters or sort of master's level counselors, et cetera. So it was a good experience for me. So at that time, my thoughts about my long-term career was that I wanted to be a clinician. I didn't have any particular goals related to research or academia at that time. And actually, that's not unusual in my experience in meeting other psychologists or people in the mental health fields, that often people want to, quote unquote, help people, you know, and to become a clinician. And it's the frequency that people become interested in research, you know, varies, of course. But anyway. After 1.5 years in Columbus, remember the letters that I sent out to the Directory of Services? Well, one of those letters came back to me. It had, you know that the post office, if you have, you know, the wrong address or a forwarding address, they put a yellow sticker on the letter and send it to the, you know, to the next place. That letter that I sent to this place in San Francisco that I'll tell you about had 2 of the yellow stickers on it. So I am sure, I mean, that, you know, convinced me there is a God. There has to be, because this letter, which was almost 2 years old, finally got to San Francisco, and they offered me a job. This place in San Francisco was called the Research and Training Center on Deaf Mental Health, and it was under the University of California, San Francisco. And it had a pretty big staff, multidisciplinary staff, several psychologists, linguists, interpreters, some people whose expertise was deaf education, and it was just a fabulous environment. It was the most respected, most productive sort of deaf psychology, et cetera, program in the country. Not to mention it wasn't bad living in San Francisco. So actually I remember saying that in Columbus that, oh, I'm ready, I'm on the next plane out, thank you very much. I enjoyed my time with you, but I'm not turning down San Francisco. In addition to the research work they did, and they got their funding mostly from a big grant from what was then called NIDRR, the National Institute on Deafness and Rehabilitation Research, which is under the Department of Education. And their head psychiatrist was extremely famous, a woman named Hildy, S-C-H-L-I, Schlesinger. And if you've ever seen the book Sound and Sign, she co-wrote that book. She's a very, very famous American psychiatrist who kind of got in the deaf field probably in the 1950s or early 1960s. She set up this service program in San Francisco when altogether in America and England, I think altogether there were 6 deaf mental health programs. One in New York City, one in Chicago, one in London, the San Francisco one. I'm forgetting the others, but it was really special to work there. In addition to research, they also, of course, were serving deaf people in the San Francisco area. I also had to, one day every week, travel to an outside town in the Bay Area to serve deaf people in the outside towns. All of the clinicians did that, traveled to some other town outside in the Bay Area to provide services there. And California School for the Deaf in Fremont would send students to our center on a bus so that it would serve them as, when the bus arrived from Fremont. I could tell you lots of stories about San Francisco, but it was a fabulous, fabulous place to work. So it helped me learn a lot, and it helped me grow a lot, it helped me learn what it's like to be involved with grants or to read successful grants from the Department of Education that they wrote, every 5 years, or research reports they had to send every single year. So I was exposed to that kind of information and grant management and research, experimental planning, et cetera. And the multidisciplinary experience was great too. I learned a lot from interpreters and from the deaf education people, et cetera. And it helped me learn what I was interested in, yes. It helped me learn more about what I was good at or what I was less good at. I tended to be a very careful clinician, and one time was a little bit reprimanded for taking too long to write my psychological evaluation reports, which I wanted quality, not speed. So anyway, it helped me learn and grow in many different ways. I remember this other psychologist said, you know, you should write your reports fast because nobody reads them anyway. And I thought, oh, well, that's an awful attitude. And believe me, I've seen my psych assessment reports have a lot of influence even many years after I've written them. And so that guy was really wrong. So I was there in San Francisco for 5 years, and for a number of different personal reasons and financial reasons, et cetera, it's hard to afford a house in San Francisco. I didn't like the earthquakes, but there were other reasons as well. I decided it just felt like enough time to look for a different job. And also, I disagreed with the fact that all of their research money was from NIDRR, because NIDRR had this 5-year grant opportunity related to deaf mental health, and they got that grant 3 times, so that was 15 years of deaf mental health funding. But they didn't write grants to other agencies, et cetera, which I knew automatically was, a bad idea not to have more diverse funding. So I was concerned about their long-term future, and sure enough, a year after I left, NIDRR decided that they didn't want a deaf mental health 5-year grant anymore. They wanted to focus on the hard of hearing population. So UCCD lost all that funding and had to lay off lots of people. So luckily, I left at a proper time. I began looking for jobs on the East Coast again. I went to Gallaudet because they had an opening for a clinical psychologist on their psychology department. And I was pretty interested in that idea, but I had an interesting conversation with one of the administrators at Gallaudet, and I asked him, what are the opportunities for professional promotion, et cetera, as a hearing person at Gallaudet? And he told me, quite honestly, and I thank him, not good. So that didn't have a big influence at the time, because I expected that answer and I respected that answer, but I just thought I'd share that with you as something interesting that happened. I also interviewed in South Carolina. They had a job opportunity for a person in the Department of Mental Health, the State Department of Mental Health, to direct services, mental health services, public mental health services for deaf people, and I was interviewing for that job as well. But at the same time, all these 3 opportunities were happening all at the same time. And there was an opportunity at the University of Rochester that I read about in an APA publication. And that opportunity was to develop a psychological testing service for the outpatient program at Strong Hospital's Department of Psychiatry. And as Jess mentioned earlier, I had been very interested in psychological testing. I'd done a lot of psychological testing with deaf people and actually some with hearing people as well. I had a small private practice where I did psychological testing only with hearing people as well. So I had a lot of psych testing experience, and I knew that I could set up that program easy, no problem. So I applied, and I knew that I would have to, explain to the department chairperson that my real interest was in deaf-related work, and that my long-term plans would be to establish services for deaf people at Strong Hospital, et cetera, and do research in that area. And so I prepared this speech, like this formal speech, to try to convince them that that was important. And I'll never forget that I got like 2 sentences into my speech, and the department chair cut me off and said, "Bob, it's Rochester. We understand that's important." So that was very smooth. Next. Next, please. So I did establish the psychological testing service, which still exists now. And eventually, after my deaf work grew, I was able to give up the psych testing service and give that to other people to run. So one of the first things I did related to deaf things is, as Strong's psychiatry department has the same kind of APA-approved internship I mentioned before. And so what I felt an ethical obligation to bring more deaf people into the psychology field. So I wrote a grant and successfully got a grant from the National Institute of Mental Health to create a specific position within our APA-approved internship program, positioned specifically for a deaf individual. And so I also had some private foundation funding for that as well. So that began what we now call our program for deaf trainees. And we have had, understand it's not easy to find a deaf person at that exact level of their education needing to complete their PhD in clinical psychology and ready for internship. I mean, how many, at that time, this is, understand, 1990. So at that time, how many deaf people were at that level of, readiness for, for that internship experience? And it wasn't easy, but it's easier now, but it wasn't easy back then. But I'm proud that we were able to find a deaf PhD level student to join the internship program, I think every year except 2 since 1990. So that's pretty good. So we also would welcome students, deaf students in master's level programs. We had several from the art therapy program at Nazareth College here in Rochester. We had a couple of social work interns. And we always had many deaf students on co-op from our IT psychology program. We'd have 2 or 3 or 4 every year. So that's what our program for deaf trainees is and still is. So that was the first sort of big step related to what I was doing, except I was serving deaf patients in the psychiatry department. Of course, the psychiatry department was serving deaf patients before, but always with interpreters. I was the first person with sign skills to be able to do that myself. And then the intern. So it was Bob and the intern for a couple of years until my boss came up to me one day and said, "Time to hire a partner." And so he gave me permission to create a faculty position for another psychologist. And then later on, we grew some more, partly because I was getting research grants, and that helped free up hospital money to pay for more clinicians. And so we had a social work position created, and then a master's level counselor position created so that we could use hospital money to pay for their clinical services, and I could use research money to pay for their collaboration and involvement in research things. Also, as Jess mentioned before, we got a number of different contracts to create films in ASL. That's a lecture for another time, but we've gotten several contracts to do that because we do a really good job at that. And what we do is these contracts were always involving some kind of source material, maybe someone's website, especially from yes, thank you, Kathy. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, contracted with us to make a number of films for them, and we would start with their website and analyze it for what information was most important information, and then we'd make up a story about why would deaf people have some reason to be talking about this topic, and and made sure that all the essential learning points were in the film somewhere. Plus, we'd throw in, some fun deaf culture things and video phones, et cetera, to make it more interesting and appealing to deaf audiences. And we actually found out that a couple of our films continue to be purchased by hearing people and hearing agencies, because hearing audiences are finding our films more interesting than the source material that we started with. So all the films have voice and captions, as well as all the deaf characters and sign language, so that they're accessible to hearing people too, or mixed families of deaf and hearing people. We have a film on young women's health, et cetera, so that a mixed deaf hearing family could watch it together and discuss important women's health issues. Jess mentioned several areas of my research interest, and I'll just explain a little bit about why there are several areas. Why not just psych testing, boom, or why not just some other area of psychology? And that's not the kind of researcher I am. And when I was applying for this job as Associate Dean for Research, that was part of my emphasis in applying for this job, is it's not like Bob's going to arrive here and follow his important personal research agenda, which is fine. It's important that some scientists do that, but that's not the kind of person I am. What excites me is to listen to other smart people who have smart ideas, and then feel like, oh, I can help you do that. I can help you accomplish that. I can write a grant to help you accomplish that, or mentor you, or write an article, et cetera. That's what really excites me. And so that's why my areas of experience and publications, et cetera, are relatively varied, because that's how I like to work, to collaborate with smart people who may not exactly have the proper skills to write a grant or design a research project, et cetera, but I can help with that, sort of in exchange for their interesting ideas, et cetera. So that's why during the job interview here, I sort of characterized myself as like looking through a telescope at many, many stars, instead of looking through a microscope at whatever I personally happen to be interested in. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of the academic culture, et cetera. At the University of Rochester, the pathways for promotion and tenure, there's about 4 or 5 different pathways. Why? Because some of our faculty primarily do clinical work, serving patients, and they need a way for that to be respected and rewarded, et cetera. And some people at the U of R are researchers, and they need their particular pathway for promotion and tenure, et cetera. And some people do a mixture of several things, which happened to be my track to promotion, was sort of the mixed activities track. So, regarding advice to you all who are thinking about academic careers, is it's really important to know the rules related to promotion and tenure, and sort of keep your eye on what those rules are, and pursue them with good advice, et cetera. But make sure you're choosing a track that fits your interests, and that your mentors or supervisors, et cetera, will support. Over the years in the Department of Psychiatry at Strong, there's been an increase in the formality of mentoring services. Now each faculty member is assigned 2 mentors to work with, and there's pretty rigid oversight of writing your 5-year career development plan, et cetera, and the meetings with mentors, et cetera. It's become quite formal, and I'd like to see that happen more here at NTID, to more formalize the structure of mentoring, et cetera. Especially because, I've learned enough now in 3 months on the job that we have a wonderful pool of relatively young faculty who have wonderful potential, but we don't have a lot of sort of mid-career faculty to help mentor them successfully. And we have some, yes, but not as many as I would like. So I think the idea of formalizing the mentoring situation here is an important thing for myself to keep in mind and promote. 26 years at the University of Rochester as a clinician and researcher. I did a lot of lecturing and things, but I didn't, except for 2 times, I didn't teach a formal course. And I was never really an administrator. I ran research teams and actually hosted 2 rather large conferences, but I was never a department chair or any kind of administrator like that. So the idea of coming here at an associate dean level was very scary. But there were certain people here at NTID who really encouraged me, please apply. And my boss at the University of Rochester, I was talking with him about how nervous I was about that idea, and I said, and it's a technical school. I mean, what do I know about engineering or computer science or all these things, wonderful things that happen here? And he said, Bob, other people will know that. This job is a people skills job, and you have that. So, and organization, which I'm good at organizing things. So anyway, that helped reduce my fears, and eventually, one thing led to another, and here I am for 3 months. Part of that is believing in yourself, and with discussions with my boss at Strong, we sort of together, he convinced me that I should believe that I could do this job and do it well, and that was important feedback and important in ultimately making my decision that I would enjoy coming here. And it certainly has been a really growth experience, and that's part of why I wanted it too. I wanted to add, what's it like being an administrator, and will I be good at it? Will I be lousy, and what have you? So that was part of the appeal as well. So what's worked for me in my professional and academic career? I would say, and I always have said, number one is writing skill. I can't overemphasize the importance of writing skill in an academic career. And I'm thinking of another lecture I do where I have that bullet point twice because it's so important. And if get feedback on your writing, try to improve your writing all the time. It is just so very, very, very important. And of course, also good people skills. I mean, a successful academic career is in part a social experience, and having good people skills is important as well. And we all need good feedback on what we do well or less well regarding not only our technical skills, but also our soft skills, our social skills, for example. Believe in yourself, believe you have something to contribute to a new challenge, to a new step, to a new experience. As I said before, I just relish collaborating with people who have interests or ideas that are different than mine. It's such an incredible growth experience and a great experience to be able to help people as a team to achieve things that I couldn't do alone and that they couldn't do alone. Another hint is publishing. Publish anything everything you can, everything you can. The best example I have of that is that I was invited to give a speech at the American Psychological Association convention during the APA's 100-year anniversary. And so I proposed a speech on looking back at 100-year history of deaf mental health and what's up, what happened over 100 years in deaf psychology or deaf mental health. So that was actually a fun experience, and I wrote so I gave the speech, and I thought, well, that could be an article. I mean, it wasn't research, it wasn't data, but it was certainly a speech worth giving, but also an article worth reading. So I wrote it and published it, and it has become actually a very popular article because nobody's ever written something about that before. So my point here is that I think many people, especially like junior faculty or young people, underestimate themselves about what they can contribute to a field, to science or whatever field you want to talk about. Don't underestimate your value or your potential contribution, and write, and publish. One person told me that an academic person should always have one article in press, one article under review, and one article you're currently writing. And you have to be an advocate for yourself. I remember, it's just my boss at Strong Hospital was so wise. One time I remember him telling me, Bob, I wanted to ask for something, and I felt shy or hesitant about asking for whatever it was. And he said, Bob, your job is to advocate for what you need and what the Deaf Wellness Center needs. That's your job, and I'll never forget that. And so I wanted to just share that with you because it's your job too, especially in an academic environment. There's Lucy with her 5-cent advice booth. So these are my personal recommendations. In graduate school, in my experience, maybe some people will disagree, the difference between an A and a B grade is not worth the time, in my opinion. If you can save time by doing well enough to get a B in graduate school, then use that time you've saved to focus on your dissertation. That's my personal advice. I actually left graduate school a year early than my other peers because of that. I got some A's, but I also got a lot of B's, which was, in my opinion, wise. One time I was giving advice to someone, and I said, your job is to be famous. That's your job in the academic world. And really, that's a simple, succinct way to say it. That's your job. When time comes for promotion, tenure, et cetera, the committee will send out requests for letters from people around the country or internationally, and those letters better say, I know that person's, I know them, they do this, they do that, they're leaders in this, they're leaders in that. And that's the kind of letter and reputation that you have to be successful in the higher level promotions and tenures. As I said, social skills do matter, and writing is so very important. And take advantage of opportunities to network and collaborate with people outside of this, the Rochester area, wherever you live in the future. National collaboration and international collaboration, first of all, is a great growth experience, but secondly, is great for your career. Get honest feedback, even when it hurts to get negative feedback. And be persistent. It's right now in the National Institutes of Health grant world, it's normal and completely expected that your first application will be turned down, and that you improve it with the feedback that the committee gives you, and then you resubmit next time with improvements. And that's normal in the NIH world. So you have to be persistent. You can't give up even though you worked hard on writing a grant or writing an article, et cetera, and it wasn't accepted the first time. You always get feedback, whether you're writing grants or writing articles, et cetera. Use that feedback and be persistent. Next. And advocate for yourself, because nobody else probably will. Believe in your potential and find allies to help you through your career progress. The end.